and I'm gonna mute.
Awesome. Okay. Well, it's really nice to see all of y'all today. I actually can only see the panelists. I can no longer see the attendees, but I know you're there. And I want to welcome you all to the second part of our 2020 Positive Women's Network USA Policy 101 webinar series. In this one, we'll be going over one of our policy areas at PWN, trans rights, safety, and justice. No, don't do that. So hi. Today, your moderators are myself, Brianna Diaz. I am the Policy Director for Positive Women's Network, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
And me, I am Kelly Flannery. My long title is the If, When, How Reproductive Justice HIV Fellow, but you can call me the Legal Fellow. And my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm in Berkeley, California.
Awesome. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce your presenters for today because they're so incredible. So today joining us, we have Alexa Rodriguez. Her pronouns are she, her, hers, and Alexa is originally from El Salvador. She currently works as a trans care navigator at Whitman Walker Health. Previously, Alexa has worked for the DC government as a health impact specialist serving transgender women, an MSM of color, and is the director of Trans Latinx DMV. She has over 20 years of experience working on advocacy and service provision for transgender people living with HIV, particularly trans Latina women. And then we also have joining us today is Mateo de la Torre, whose pronouns are he, him, and elle. And he is a transgender Latino and activist from Tijuana, Mexico, based in Washington, DC. And as the Director of Policy and Advocacy at Black and Pink, he oversees the strategic development of the National LGBTQ and PLHIV Criminal Justice Working Group and supports Black and Pink chapters through training, advocacy campaigns, and support for inside members. Prior to joining Black and Pink, Mateo served as the Racial and Economic Justice Policy Advocate at the National Center for Transgender Equality, where he led the organization's advocacy and policy work related to sex work, immigration, policing, and corrections, as well as issues impacting low to no income trans people and trans people of color. There is so much more to share about these individuals, but I will stop there, and we are so lucky to have y'all share your knowledge, your lived experience, and expertise with us today, so thank you. Awesome. So just real quick, for anyone who is not already a member or aware of the Positive Women's Network, I wanted to go ahead and share, who we are. In the Positive Women's Network, our mission is to prepare and involve women and people of trans experience living with HIV and all our diversity, including gender identity and sexual expression, in all levels of policy and decision making. PWN is a national membership body of women and people of trans experience living with HIV. The organization was founded in 2008. PWN is truly an organization of its own in that, we are led by our constituency, our member base, and, even the policy agenda that we adopt and the policy issues that we prioritize every year are, the result of what our members identify as the issues. So that's who we are. So today, we have three main objectives that we're hoping to reach through this webinar. The first one is to improve our competency on terms and concepts related to the transgender community. We want to better understand PWN's commitment to trans rights, safety, and justice. And we also want to identify where trans rights, safety, and justice issues show up in our work and in our lived experience, and how to address them. So Kelly, take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Bree. So here's where we're going to start a lot of the really 101 terms and concepts for trans rights, safety, and justice. So these are terms that a lot of people on this webinar are probably going to be really familiar with, but we wanted to make sure that we are starting with a common grounding and a common set of terminology. So we're going to go through just a couple of terms. The first one is biological sex. So this is a set of sex characteristics. Generally, we have primary and secondary. So when you think of primary sex characteristics, you can think of things like your internal reproductive system, hormones, chromosomes, or genitalia, while secondary sex characteristics are things that tend to more develop around puberty. So changes to hip and shoulder width, breasts, facial and body hair, body contour, and changes to your voice. Next slide. Gender identity. So gender identity is the internal, deeply felt sense of being male, female, something else, or something other, or in between. It is the gender that you know you are. Next slide. Gender expression is something that sometimes gets conflated with gender identity, but these are actually two different things. Gender expression are external characteristics and behavior that can express one's gender identity to others. So for example, through your clothing, your hairstyles, your mannerisms, or even your hobbies. Next slide. So sexual orientation, this is our gender-based attraction to other people. And this is not just sexual attraction, but it's also physical, emotional, and spiritual. Next slide. So here is our gender unicorn. This is where we're sort of putting it all together. So you see on the top, we have gender identity, and remember that's your deeply internal sense of who you are and what your gender is. And so we have three arrows that go from female, male, other gender, and folks can orient themselves anywhere on those lines. We have similar for gender expression, which remember is also different than gender identity. There's sex assigned at birth. And then on the bottom, we have physically attracted to and emotionally attracted to. And so these are sort of under the rubric of sexual orientation that we talked about on the previous slide. Next slide. Okay, so now we're gonna put it together a little bit. So what is transgender? What does it mean to be a transgender person? A transgender person is someone whose sex assigned at birth is different from who they know they are on the inside. Next slide. So when you look at our gender unicorn here, what you'll see is we have stars on gender identity. In this case, we have a star that this person's gender identity is more a female, woman, girl, and less so on the male, man, boy, or other gender section. And their sex assigned at birth is male. So this person would be a trans woman, trans girl, however they choose to identify. Next slide. So we also have gender nonconforming. Sometimes you might hear trans and gender nonconforming, TGNC. So a gender nonconforming person is someone whose gender expression is different from societal expectations related to gender. And so we see a shift from gender identity to gender expression when we're talking about gender nonconforming. You may have also heard some other terms. So maybe you heard terms like gender non-binary, gender queer, gender fluid. We really want to emphasize that preferred vocabulary varies by person and by community and over time. I, for example, am a cisgender woman, and so trying to use person-first language, I might say a person of trans experience or a trans woman or trans man, but ultimately as a cisgender person, it's not for me to define these terms, it's for the trans community to define. Next slide. So in this case, this person, their gender identity varies, their gender expression varies, their sex assigned at birth was male. Maybe this person is gender non-binary, maybe gender queer, maybe they define themselves somewhere else. Next slide, please. Cisgender. So a cisgender person is someone whose sex assigned at birth is the same as their gender identity. So basically, they identify with the same sex that they were assigned at birth. Next slide. So on the gender unicorn, what this looks like, for example, would be if someone whose gender identity here is mostly female, not much male or other genders, and their sex assigned at birth was female. So this might be a cisgender woman. Note that gender expression, there are no stars on there, and the same was true of the transgender person. Next slide, please. So pronouns. if you want a quick shorthand, pronouns are basically how someone's going to refer to you when you step outside of the room. Pronouns are one of the ways that we signal our gender identity. You can never assume someone's gender identity. And if you're living such that people correctly assume your pronouns, that is a form of privilege that not all people have. So PWN, for example, always encourages folks to add their pronouns when they're introducing themselves, because one, we're not going to know someone's pronouns by looking at them. And two, we do want to normalize saying pronouns. So next slide, please. Cool. So I'm going to pause there. Those were just some really general terms that we can dig into more if you would like, but we have really rich presenters coming up. And so right now we're going to do a little bit of a poll. I'm going to launch it. And you can go ahead and answer it. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Do, 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 do. All right, keep going, y'all. I am seeing just like a ton of correct answers. Y'all are doing great. All right, we're gonna close it out in, let's say 5, 4, 3, hurry, get your answer in, 2, 1, end poll. Wow, so let's share the results. You all did a really great job. So very mostly correct. Someone's gender, a transgender person is someone whose gender identity is different than their sex assigned at birth. Great work, everyone. I'm gonna stop sharing and I'm gonna mute.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly, for going over those terms with everyone, and the use of the unicorn. I really appreciate that. So yeah, I'm really quickly going to go over, the Positive Women's Network's policy agenda. You've probably seen it on our website. If you haven't seen it, then visit our website, get familiar with it. And there are 6 core areas that we cover as part of our policy agenda. They're universal health care, economic justice, sexual and reproductive health rights and justice, ending criminalization, trans rights, safety and justice, and ending violence against women living with HIV. And so today, we're focused on the trans rights, safety, and justice portion of our policy agenda. And, it's PWN's vision that, we work towards a future in which all people of trans experience are supported to live fulfilling, secure, and happy lives free from all forms of violence, harassment, hostility, or discrimination. And, one of the reasons why we wanted to offer, key terms and that, kind of like foundational education that Kelly just went through is, this is one of the most basic ways that we can show our respect and understanding and like cultural competency around the trans community. And from that, we're able to, build our advocacy chops in the sense of identifying, what are trans issues on our day-to-day, advocacy work that we're doing at the local, state, or federal level. And we're definitely going to have some great examples for you from our panelists. But yeah, this is our vision for trans rights, safety, and justice at PWN, and we hold it in our core whenever we're doing trans-specific policy work. So in doing that, doing this work, we typically apply a gender justice lens. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with what a gender justice lens is in our work. If not, no worries. We also have an entire portion of our policy agenda on that, which you can find out more on our website. But, a key component of gender justice is, the respect for bodily autonomy. And that is that people have the right to choose what happens with their own bodies. No one else has any right to tell you what you can and cannot do with your body. And then another thing as part of our gender justice lens analysis is, we center that diversity is strength. We all share many experiences. We are composed of intersectional identities for sure. And so a lot of us that might have similar marginalized identities share a lot of experiences, whether that's like as, you know, people of color experiencing racism or queer people experiencing, you know, homophobia. Like whenever we have that, like we do maybe have those negative experiences, but also the positive. But there are also unique experiences based on our identity, right? And it's through that uniqueness, it's through that difference of lived experience that we draw our strength. And then one final component of PWN's gender justice lens is unity, is that we unite as a community around things like state violence and access to care. So yeah, we take those those three former things that we hold when applying a gender justice lens to policies or laws that we see at the local, state, and federal level. And, you know, we use them to analyze barriers at every level of society. And there's a lot, but I'm just gonna go over three real quick. And one is interpersonal and community barriers. This can be street harassment, family rejection, discrimination, and there's also such things as like institutional barriers, right? And that can be particularly for transgender people, you know, in educational settings, trans youth are, you know, disproportionately targeted for bullying by students, faculty, staff, and teachers, which leads to a higher rate of push out of trans youth. We know in the healthcare setting, especially under this administration, that there can be a lack of educated healthcare providers, those that are trans competent, and that can really dissuade members of the transgender community from seeking healthcare that they have every right and reason to have access to. And another one, you know, is housing. Housing is a big issue for a lot of communities, especially trans communities, in that there's a lot of discrimination in who has access to housing, and people can be denied, you know, access to housing because of their trans identity. And another barrier that we face in society is culture. You know, sometimes the media likes to reinforce stereotypes of what does it mean to be trans, what is the trans lived experience, and that can be really, that can have a detrimental impact on members of the trans community that don't adhere to those assumptions and stereotypes reinforced in media. And that goes into the next point of stigmatizing assumptions. But with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so Mateo can share his screen so he can go through these, like all these barriers in more depth.
Okay, well, I'm gonna try to share my screen.
I believe in you.
Okay, let's see, share screen. Here we go. This, shift it over to. All right, can y'all hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so hey folks, I'm just gonna quickly reintroduce myself just because I'm used to it. My name is Mateo de la Torre. I use he, him pronouns. I am a trans Latino from Tijuana, Mexico, which is currently where I'm at right now. I'm at my mom's house. And I live in DC, and I've been there working on like trans issues and criminal justice like combined for around like 4 years now. So yeah, I'm at Black and Pink right now. We're a prison abolitionist organization for folks that don't know about us. And we're based in Nebraska, but we're a national organization, and we have chapters that y'all can get involved in all across the country. And right now they're doing a lot of work around decarceration. So if folks are interested in that, feel free to visit our website. It's at blackandpink.org. But essentially I'm here to chat a little bit and go a little bit deeper into some of these issues. So you heard from Kelly, kind of like who trans people are, but now I want you all to understand a little bit more about like what trans people experience. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on numbers, but we're gonna talk a little bit more about like how this actually presents itself as a barrier for trans people in our everyday lives, right? So one thing to understand is that every single issue is a trans issue. My goal for us after kind of like we're done with this section is to kind of have an understanding that like when you as an ally or you as a person in the queer community that might not be trans, it's like how can you step into your work and into your issues and ask the very simple questions of like, well, how does this issue impact trans people? Are there any trans people here in our organizing community? And beyond that, like think about like subsects of that, right? Like, well, how does this impact poor trans people? How does this impact Black, Indigenous, people of color who are also trans? How does this impact people who are trans and disabled, right? So bringing in those questions when you're starting to organize around any type of issue is extremely important. And more than anything, just like recognizing whether or not you actually have trans people in these spaces in community with you. So now I'm only going to cover a couple of the issues that you saw in the previous slide, but the whole goal is for you to see how interconnected all of these issues are, how one barrier can lead to additional barriers in other areas of life. And we're going to get started with IDs. So most folks, like when they think about like trans issues, they don't think like automatically to IDs, right? But it's just something that is entrenched in kind of like all areas of life for many trans people, because basically like 2/3 of trans and gender nonconforming people don't have access to an ID that matches their gender identity. So here's some questions to ask about when you hear about like different issues, right? Like, what are the barriers? So getting an ID costs money. It could be cost prohibitive for some people. It depends on where you were born and where you live, whether or not that state has laws that allow for you to update your documents. And in the worst of cases, some states would require you to have, as a trans person, to have some very invasive surgical interventions to be able to change your gender marker. So the result of that is forced sterilization. And keeping in mind, right, that not every trans person or gender nonconforming person wants to have that kind of invasive surgery or desires that surgery as part of their transition. So those are things to keep in mind too. Now, there's even additional barriers based on like the context of each person's life, right? So let's say that somebody has a criminal record. It can become extremely difficult for them to be able to change their gender marker or their name on any form of document. And it's even additional barriers exist for folks who are in specific government registries, like sex offense registries. So I want folks to think about like, what are all the things that you use your ID for, and how can that be like from uncomfortable all the way to very dangerous for trans people. So this is just something for folks to keep in mind, that like, let's say that you walk in somewhere where you're required to use your ID. That could result in somebody hearing that your name doesn't match the way that you are presenting, and it could lead to either losing a job opportunity, losing a housing opportunity. It could lead to somebody following you into the parking lot and doing something really messed up that shows up in the form of violence. So it's not just like the fact of having an ID that you could use to prove your age. It's the fact that it can open up an opportunity for violence towards our community. So another area that I want folks to learn a little bit more about is housing and homelessness, right? Like, let's start off with some basic facts. When you're trans youth, you're 120% more likely to experience homelessness. 2 in 5 Black trans people and 1/3 of Latinx trans people will report experiencing homelessness at one point in their lives. And like, the question is why, right? So like Brianna was talking about, unfortunately, it is very much tied to interpersonal violence and family rejection. Interpersonal violence can also come from like religious communities, right? And this goes beyond well, I don't have a place to stay anymore, right? Like, it is tied to all your network of resources and opportunities that are no longer available to you, right? So you become alienated from some of the like foundational things that you were relying upon to just exist as a person, right? So barriers there are economic opportunity, right? Like, if you can't find a job as a trans person, then you probably can't pay rent. If you can't find a landlord that will actually rent to you, then you can't live there, right? And again, what are these additional barriers that come along with some people's experiences, right? If you have a criminal record, you will most likely not qualify for any form of low-income housing assistance. whatsoever. And it's especially more difficult for folks who are on some form of registry, because that really limits the areas that you can live in a city or a town. So let's say that like your only family member that is willing to kind of like take you in and support you for a little bit lives close to a park, then you're kind of out of luck at that point, and now you're back to kind of like point zero. And what do folks think about when somebody's at point zero when it comes to housing, shelters? Well, that's an extreme barrier for many trans and gender non-conforming people, because it's just commonly understood that that's a space where a lot of violence happens. When it comes to like a person walking in, let's say to like a women's only shelter, either like a domestic violence or just women's only shelter, for one, they won't allow trans women, and it makes it extremely uncomfortable and difficult for trans men to access those services. Now, we're not even fitting into the equation gender non-conforming people, people who are non-binary, who might look ambiguous, and that can become a barrier for them accessing that, just that perception that that person in that shelter has built into their policies too, right? So again, like when a lot of like trans women have tried to access shelters, they will most likely end up in men's shelters, where they'll experience a lot of violence and harassment, even in the grounds. And that moves us into sexual violence. And again, just like starting out with some facts, it's that like, so there's the largest trans survey of people in the nation, surveyed 28,000 people in 2015. And out of that survey, we saw that at least half of the people, half of 28,000 people said that they've experienced some form of sexual violence or sexual harassment. Now, when you think about the folks who answered the survey who have also engaged in sex work, now they're up to 80% of having experienced sexual violence and sexual harassment. And when you think about the folks who are disabled, we're looking at a 60%. So where's the justice, right? Like, where does a sex worker go to find justice for being sexually harassed or sexually assaulted? You can't go to the police. The police will most likely arrest you or coerce you into stuff you don't want to do in that situation. So let's shift over to talk about police. So talking about policing prisons and jails, it's just literally, it's not working, and we don't like it. So again, starting with a fact, right? Like over 60% of trans people will tell you that they don't feel comfortable calling the police when they need help. Not just like any day, right? Like some situation where somebody would say, this is the type of situation you call the police for. They don't feel comfortable in that situation calling them, right? And why? So in order to think about that, like we need to kind of take a step back and think about like, well, who do we know is over policed in the United States, right? We're thinking about poor communities. We're thinking about immigrant and undocumented communities. We're thinking about Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. And we're thinking about drug users. We're thinking about sex workers. And a lot of the times, like trans people fit into all of those identity groups and exist predominantly, exist in those communities. So one of the things that I kind of want to talk about too is that like last year, like a year and a half ago, I put out a report around like police department policies around just the basic question of like, well, how are you engaging with trans people in your community? And like, how are you training people to respectfully engage with people in your community who happen to be trans and gender non-conforming, right? It shouldn't be like a big question, but I mean, unsurprisingly, like we barely found any policies. Like we looked at the 25 largest police departments and almost none of them had anything that actually said trans or transgender. So some of the stuff that I want to like pull out from that is that, again, like they're not receiving any form of direction or education around how to engage with trans people. And more often than not, like you'll hear across the country, people talking about situations where trans women are just going about their days. And then this phenomena called walking while trans happens, where police officers start profiling women as like be existing and trying to do sex work. So it's called walking while trans, as some people have dubbed it. And it's essentially just like an opportunity for police officers to like invade somebody's privacy and cause harm to people on the basis of profiling. So for example, like the NYPD was doing this thing of like stopping people that they were assuming were sex workers simply because they were trans. And then if that person happened to have any condoms on them, they would end up confiscating the condoms and throwing this person in jail for trying to do sex work. And then one of the most ironic parts was when in DC, the Metropolitan Police Department actually started confiscating condoms that the health department was distributing. So it was just like extremely ironic that, and like the impacts on public health are just like super interconnected and clear at that point. And then one of the last things about like police departments is that when you look at their policies, they have clear policies saying that they cannot sexually harass or rape a member of the agency. So they can't do that to each other, but there is nothing in these police department policies, and I encourage you to look for it, and wherever you're located, to look at your local police department policies and try to find something that says that they can't sexually harass or can't rape members of the public. You will most likely not find it, unfortunately. And that just like, when you start thinking about that in a situation where, let's say that you have a police officer assuming that somebody's a sex worker, whether or not they're doing it, there's an ultimatum, right? It's either you get arrested because I have this assumption and it's a common practice for me to just bring you in, or you can try to get some like sexual favors from people in exchange for not getting arrested. And when you start thinking about the implications, again, like who are you going to report this person to? This is the law officer. So who are you going to report them to? And then two, what if you're undocumented? What if you have a pass? What if you're on parole? Like what if all these other things, it could lead to a deportation proceeding. So what do? Like you don't have any power in that situation, right? And that's something that a lot of police departments take advantage of. So I want to move briefly into like prisons and jails, and I'm just going to touch on like 3 high-level areas that are like very specific to trans people, right? So when it comes to booking somebody into a facility, I've literally had corrections officers call me and tell me, we're processing a trans person. We don't know what to do with them. And their default is one of two options usually. It's either you strip the person and you look at their genitalia, and if they have a penis, they're gonna go to a men's facility. And if they have a vagina, they're gonna go to a women's facility, regardless of their gender identity or where their perception of where they would feel safest, which are 2 things that by law they have to consider when making the determination of where they're gonna put people. And then, more likely than not, what you end up seeing is a lot of our people end up in solitary confinement for like huge amounts of time, just because like there is no other alternative according to these facilities that would be safer for these people, and it's under the guise of for their own protection. And I'm not sure like where folks are at in this conversation, right? But essentially, like the longer you stay in solitary confinement, the harsher the impact there is on your mental well-being. So a lot of our people end up in that situation. And then again, they don't get access to any type of programming that would lead to any form of early release or any kind of benefit in their reentry journey, reentering into our communities. And then around healthcare, the correctional healthcare system is a joke, just like period. If you need like for allergies, it's a joke. For anything, it's a joke, let alone when you're starting to ask about gender affirming care like hormones. Forget about surgery. There's just like, there's a lot of limitations there, and we have amazing advocates continuing to work on that, but like that's a barrier that shouldn't exist in the first place. And then again, when you're thinking about the fact that like trans people are, I think, 5 times more likely to be living with HIV, getting any form of access to HIV care on the inside is extremely difficult, as evidenced by like the countless trans people and people living with HIV that have died inside of these facilities, both detention centers and federal and state prisons. And then just lastly, like the violence that we talked about that folks experience on the outside, like it is just amplified when they're on the inside with significantly less resources. So in closing, every issue is a trans issue. And not every trans person is the same, right? So like I kind of took like a clear path to show how some of these things could be overlapping, but it's very different depending on the context for people, right? So like if you have a supportive family and you have like access to resources, you might never experience homelessness. You might never experience any of these other issues, but there is a very interconnected way of how people feel the impact of these. So just lastly, I want to say that, and like, I'm used to any type of advocacy, make sure to like always ask the question, like, how does this impact trans people and who's in the room? Because when it comes to funding, every $100 that goes into LGBTQ advocacy, I want you to like think about this number. Only 1 penny of $100 goes to specifically trans programming. And yes, while we need more money to go specifically to trans funding, I need and we need the people that receive the $99.99 of that $100 to start incorporating and centering trans people in the issues that they work on, because they are trans issues. And for example, our trans leaders have been doing mutual aid work for ever. Even within the LGBTQ movement, trans people don't get a fair opportunity to a fair slice of the cake, let's call it that, when it comes to positions of power or jobs that actually pay or jobs that are full-time or jobs that actually have benefits. And like we're still making something out of nothing when it comes to keeping our people housed, our people fed. Most shelters don't accept people who are active sex workers, so we're housing them, right? And I just want to uplift like a community leader in New York that has been doing this work even in the time of COVID, where her name is Lorena Borjas, from Queens, New York, that literally did this work until she couldn't anymore because of a worldwide epidemic. So we need to start doing better when we move forward in our issues and in how we actually bring in trans people. And it's on you, it's on me, and we can definitely do it with support from each other. So I'm happy to take any questions at any point, like at the end or right now, but just thank you so much for having me and for wanting to learn more about the trans community.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mateo. Yeah, we'll have questions at the end. So if you can stop sharing your screen, I'll share mine so Alexa can share, start her presentation. So 1 second. All right, Alexa, take it away.
Hi, I think you have my slides.
Yeah, I have them. They're on.
Okay, cool. Gracias, buenas tardes. Gracias por tenernos acá. Thank you for having us here. My name is Alexa Rodriguez, and I'm the director of Trans Latinx DMV. We're a two-spirit trans woman-led organization that centers the needs of Black and Indigenous trans Latinx people living in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. We do advocacy, community organizing, and mobilization, and many other stuff. And we need money. So thank you, Mateo, for reminding us that Trans Latina Coalition National just launched a document to sign a petition for philanthropic something. I was trying to share that in the chat, but I couldn't find it. But if you go to translatincoalition.org, you can find it there. And it's for asking the philanthropic to invest 20% on transgender topics. So thank you for reminding us that. Hola, Melissa. I get distracted really fast, so I'm gonna hide the chat. So thank you for reminding us also about the vulnerabilities when we are transgender persons. Like in this slide, when I was creating this slide, I was so sad just remembering how Roxana, a trans woman from Honduras, has in the detention center. She was HIV positive and she didn't get the attention that she needed on time. So it was it was an injustice, and that had to end. But it didn't end with her passing. Johanna, well, also passing because she didn't have the attention that she required just for being transgender. And they were in the United States, facilitated attention, but being marginalized in immigrants, we're trying to run from our countries. Like myself, I was fleeing violence and transphobia, and as my sisters. So Camila were a transgender woman who crossed the border, and she got detained. And when she was being interviewed, she was not believed because she was fearing to go back to El Salvador. And she got deported. And a few days after, she got killed. And it's an injustice, it's inhuman that we are trying to trying to be alive. And being transgender, a transgender woman is, for other people, it's like something that's, it's like not serious. Like people is not taking this seriously. So it made me think that this will continue to happen. So we are doing campaigns for detention centers to release our community, but it's not enough. So we need to do more. Next slide. So many trans women in the United States are killed every year. Every Transgender Day of Remembrance, we are reading names over 25 to 30, and that's almost every day. This year, even with this pandemic, we have lost 5 transgender persons in the United States, and many others in El Salvador, Brazil, Mexico. Mexico has been horrible. And many countries like in the South, like Argentina has a gender identity law. In the United States, many states provide name and gender change. But when we are trans undocumented immigrants, it's really hard to change our name, especially because we are using our home country documents. So that put us in danger. So, or we are not able to get a job. And so we many times have to do survival sex work. And that put us in risk that a client, a man can kill us or rob us or do whatever they want to do with us just because we are trying to survive. So we need more opportunity, we need more funding on trans-led organizations to support our sisters that are doing sex work. And during this emergency, there's many of them that have stopped doing sex work because it's their life is in danger. So we need support to do that. Also, there's a lot of rolling back in law, like many people who are in the borders are required to stay in Mexico to be able to see a immigration officer. So in living in many of them, they don't have where to live in Mexico. So they have to sleep on the street or shelters or even under the bridge while they're waiting to do an interview. Next slide. So there's no safe space for transgender people in the United States or anywhere in the world. We are in danger. Many people fear us. That's why we use the transphobia word, because people fear us because they don't know us. But the reality is that we are not dangerous people. We are in danger. And as I was saying before, many of our siblings and community are being killed just for being trans. And with the discrimination in society, we also face discrimination from the government because they are rolling back many of protection that we have in the past. And when people see that the government is not doing anything and they are attacking us, people feel entitled to discriminate against us, because if the government is doing it, they can do it. So our lives are really in danger. Next slide. Yeah. So there's a lot of organizations around the country that are trans-led, like Ariana Center, Trans-Latinx DMV, OLPP in Houston, New York with Lorena Borjas and Liam. So there's a lot of leaders in the community. We are doing the job, but it's not enough. We need funding. We need people like allies to support our work, and with the mind that the be an ally. Like, you can be an ally but not taking our spaces. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but being an ally is not it's being with us, but giving us our space. So my call is to, if you are serving clients, don't expect your clients to educate you, just be there for them because they need services. If you have a family member, embrace your family. If you have someone in the community, embrace them, because we need love, yes, but we need more than that. You need for you to be with us. Yeah, and I think I would end with that. Yes, that's my contact information if you want to follow us or email me. Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, so we are going to take this time then to open it up to questions from the chat. So there is a question and answer button if you would like to post your question there. Otherwise, we can see it from the chat. If Kelly, if you'd like to ask any that you see.
Yeah, so we do have one person with their hand raised. And if anyone wants to be taken off mute and ask a question, you can go ahead and just pop your hand up and I will unmute you. So right now, Carla Fields, I'm going to allow you to talk. And I am going to unmute you. So you can go ahead and ask your question.
How are you? Hello, sisters, and all of y'all from PWN and abroad. Okay, I'm calling from Philly. Okay, that I do a lot of outreach work in the community, along with trans and all that, and with my brothers and sisters out there. And the concern I have, I understand what the last speaker would say. My question is, like, she was like, I think her statement was near the end, like, she don't want people in the space, like for as trans and all that. But my thing is like this, like my concern is like, we as sisters and brothers, okay, how we gonna know what you need when you can't? I mean, like, because I'm reading on here and it says that you're not safe and stuff like that. But everywhere I go, like different organizations that I socialize with, because I have HIV. I put it out there like that, and it's all love. It's all loving, and they show love towards all gender across the board. I never seen no discrimination in my life. Until I come outside and I see it. Like when you locked up and stuff like that, and you see it. But what are y'all doing for as in the jails and to educate people about the situation, the injustice that is still going on, and that's like a pause. That really a pause that is still going on like this in America, because it's supposed to be equal rights for everyone.
Thanks, Carla. I'm going to mute you now and give our presenters a chance to respond.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of levels for discrimination or levels of violence, and I think the biggest violence that we suffer is the structural violence, like from the top, from the government, from the leaders in power. So, and then people in community think that they can do it as well. And yeah, when we share love, that's amazing. I think that that's really helpful. But we need to see more than the discrimination in society. So many times we just see the tip of the iceberg, but there's more about it. There's more violence out there. And in detention centers with immigration, I saw in the chat of all these eyes, we have been doing campaigns for that. In local detentions, like in prisons, uh, many times we do education, but they don't care. They just start away the training and they don't put it in practice. And they will not do it. They will not do anything. They don't care.
Yeah, and I'll just add that. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
I'll just add that, you know, a lot of the frustration that comes with the saying of like it's not up to trans people to like educate people, right? Is that we have to do that at every point in our lives and interactions with people. You know, you go to the pharmacy, you try to get your prescription. Now you have to explain why you are the person that has this name, right? Or like why, yes, you should be in this specific space that's designated by gender, like a bathroom or a locker room. And you have to like consistently be explaining that. And the thing is that like, most people don't actually correct their behavior when you put in the work to like invest in educating one person that might be doing something wrong. And then two, most trans people are never paid to do that kind of emotional labor. And it looks like a lot of like people asking you for your trauma without giving you any steps that they're going to take to really honor and hold what you shared with them and the education that you shared with them. So when it comes to like whether or not a space is accessible, I would recommend like looking into any type of trans or like queer POC organization or group to come and help you maybe do like an audit of like, what is your intake process? What kind of specific like segregated spaces do you have based on gender identity? And is that inclusive to even non-binary people or people who don't fully identify as like male or female or men or women, I mean. So that's kind of like just the background piece to that, because you'll hear a lot of people just be like frustrated and saying like, it's not my job to educate you, right? And that is true, but folks need to understand like the heaviness that is carried with that ask or with saying that statement.
Thank you so much. Oh, I'm realizing now I was unmuted. Sorry. So there is a question from someone who's called Anonymous Attendee. And so they say, thank you to both of our presenters for their knowledge and time. Could you speak about the impact of COVID-19 on TGNC communities and how allies can support trans people as new policies and procedures roll out during this time?
Yeah. So essentially, like when you start thinking about the most vulnerable people in our community because of the structural discrimination and oppression that we face, you'll see a lot of people that just don't get anywhere near to close to qualifying for any of these programs and services, right? Like you have a lot of people that are living in hotel rooms. You have a lot of people that are crashing in other people's houses. You have people like there's an actual like leader in our community that was showing symptoms and is unstably housed and was showing symptoms and then got kicked out of the first housing situation, then got kicked out of a second housing situation, and then ended up in a hotel where they just didn't feel comfortable and were experiencing symptoms, right? I haven't checked up on the status of whether this person's test came out positive, but this is one example of like even just the assumption of somebody having it can lead to additional barriers for somebody that's already experiencing unstable housing. Another situation is when you look at like folks who are experiencing poverty, they probably haven't filed taxes, right? Like somebody that is maybe getting most of their income in the underground economy is probably not filing their taxes. So you didn't file your 2018 or your 2019 taxes, then you're not going to qualify for the stimulus check. Now, if you're a sex worker or work in a certain type of industry that is near the sex industry or part of the sex industry, there are like those businesses are automatically not receiving any of the small business loan that was out there to support small businesses. So even if you're trying to run your business in a legitimate way, if it's